She came into my room without warning, and what happened next still haunts me. The door to his quarters slid open with a soft hiss that cut through the silence of the night cycle, and Lieutenant Commander Kevin Harris jerked awake from restless sleep on the military research station orbiting Kepler 442b, and his hand moved instinctively toward the plasma pistol mounted beside his bunk, but froze when he saw her standing in the doorway, bathed in the blue emergency lighting of the corridor behind her. She was not human. Her skin shimmered with an iridescent quality that shifted between deep violet and silver as she moved forward into his room, and her eyes were too large and too dark, like pools of liquid obsidian that seemed to drink in every photon of light around them, and she stood nearly 7 feet tall with limbs that were just slightly too long and too graceful to be anything born of Earth. And her body was covered in what looked like living armor that pulsed. With bioluminescent patterns across her chest and shoulders, Kevin should have reached for his weapon or called security or done anything besides stare at her in frozen fascination. But something about the way she moved stopped him cold, and there was a fluidity to her motion that suggested she could cross the distance between them faster than his nervous system could process a threat response. She raised one 4-fingered hand in what might have been a peaceful gesture, and when she spoke, her voice bypassed his ears entirely and resonated directly inside his skull with a sensation like cool water flowing through his thoughts. "Do not fear me, human." Kevin Harris, she managed to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper, and said, "How do you know my name, and how did you get past station security?" She tilted her head at an angle that would have broken a human neck, and the bioluminescent patterns across her body pulsed in what he somehow knew was amusement. And she said, "I know many things about you, Kevin Harris, and I have been watching your kind for longer than your species has had written language. And your security systems are primitive constructs that my people learned to circumvent before your ancestors discovered fire." Kevin slowly sat up in his bunk, keeping his movements careful and non-threatening, while his mind raced through every first contact protocol he had ever studied, and none of them covered what to do when an alien broke into your quarters in the middle of the night and he asked, "What do you want from me?" The alien woman moved closer with those impossibly smooth steps, and her presence seemed to fill the small room with a pressure that made his skin prickle, and she said, "I want to show you something that will change everything you think you know about your place in this galaxy. And I want to tell you a story that your leaders have kept hidden from your people for 3 generations. And most of all, I want you to help me prevent a war that will destroy both our species." Kevin felt his heart hammering against his ribs, and he said, "Why me, and why not contact the station commander or send a formal diplomatic transmission?" "Because you are different. Kevin Harris and I have studied your file and your history, and you are one of the few humans who might actually listen to what I have to say without immediately trying to capture or kill me, and because in 72 of your hours, something terrible is going to happen on this station, and you are the only one who can stop it." The weight of her words settled over him like a physical thing, and Kevin knew with absolute certainty that his life had just changed forever, and he asked what kind of terrible things. He moved to the viewport in his quarters and gestured at the planet rotating slowly below them, and its surface was mostly ocean with scattered archipelagos of volcanic islands, and she said, "Your people believe this world is uninhabited and that you are the first intelligent species to explore this system, but you are wrong, and my people have maintained a research outpost in the deepest ocean trench of that planet for nearly 4,000 of your years." Kevin stood and moved to join her at the viewport, while maintaining what he hoped was a respectful distance, and he said, "We have surveyed this entire system, and there is no evidence of any alien presence here. That is because you were meant to find no evidence." And she turned to look at him with those bottomless dark eyes and said, "Your first survey ship arrived here 37 years ago, and it detected our installation immediately, and your captain made contact with my people, and what happened next was classified at the highest levels of your military command, and every member of that crew was sworn to secrecy under threat of court-martial and imprisonment." He tried to process what she was telling him and said, "That is impossible, and I would have heard about something like that, would you?" And she moved closer to him until he could see his own reflection in the polished surface of her living armor, and said, "Your species has made contact with 17 different alien civilizations in the past century, and your population knows about exactly none of them. And your governments have decided that humanity is not ready for the truth, and so they maintain the fiction that you are alone in the universe, while they negotiate treaties and trade agreements and military alliances. In the shadows, Kevin felt the floor shifting beneath his feet, and everything he thought he knew about reality was crumbling. And he asked, if what you are saying is true, then what is going to happen in 72 hours? The alien woman turned back to the viewport, and the bioluminescent patterns across her body began pulsing in a rapid sequence that looked like distress. And she said, there is a faction among your military leadership that wants to claim this world for human colonization, and they know about my people's presence here. And they have decided that we are an obstacle to be removed, and in 72 hours, they are going to deploy a weapon that will sterilize the ocean trench where our research station is located. And they believe they can do this without anyone finding out. Kevin felt rage building in his chest, and he said that would be genocide. Ease in her voice and his mind carried a weight of terrible sadness, and said that is exactly what it would be. And there are currently 83 of my people living in that research station, including children. And they have no defensive capabilities because we are scientists and explorers, not warriors, and they will die without ever knowing what killed them, unless you help me stop this. He paced across his small quarters while his mind raced through the implications, and he said, why should I believe any of this? And you could be lying or trying to manipulate me. I could be. And she acknowledged and said, but I'm not, and I can prove everything I have told you if you are willing to come with me. Come with you where to my ship, and it is hidden in the asteroid field at the edge of this system, and from there I can show you the evidence you need to see the truth in, but we must leave now because time is running short, and the weapon is already being prepared. Kevin looked at the alien woman and tried to read her expression, but her features were too foreign and too different from anything in his experience, and he knew that going with her would be desertion, and that he could face a firing squad if he was caught. But he also knew that if she was telling the truth, then doing nothing would make him complicit in mass murder. He took a deep breath and made his decision and said, how do we get past station security? She produced what looked like a small crystalline disc from somewhere in her living armor and pressed it against his chest, and he felt a tingling sensation spread across his skin. And she said, this will make you invisible to your sensors and cameras, and as long as you stay close to me, we will not be detected. They moved through the corridors of the research station like ghosts, and Kevin marveled at how the few crew members they passed seemed to look right through them without reacting. And the alien woman led him to a maintenance airlock in one of the less trafficked sections, and they cycled through into the vacuum of space. Her ship was waiting just beyond the station's artificial gravity field, and it was like nothing Kevin had ever seen before, and its hull seemed to be made of the same iridescent material as her skin, and it absorbed and reflected light in ways that hurt his eyes to look at directly. And there were no visible seams or hatches or any of the standard features he associated with spacecraft design. They boarded through an opening that formed in the hull like a mouth, and the interior was all flowing organic curves and surfaces that glowed with soft bioluminescence, and Kevin realized with a start that the ship was alive in some sense and that it responded to the alien woman's presence like a trained animal's. She guided him to what he assumed was the command center, though it looked more like the inside of a giant seashell than any bridge he had ever seen, and she interfaced with the ship's systems by pressing her hands against various surfaces, and he felt the subtle shift as they began moving away from the stations and she gestured to a formation that looked like a chair and said, this will take several hours and I will show you the evidence you need while we travel. Kevin settled into the chair and was surprised to find it molded itself to fit his body perfectly, and the alien woman waved her hand and holographic displays materialized in the air around them, showing images and documents and video recordings. What you are about to see is classified material from your own military database, ACES, and she said, and I acquired it through means I will not explain, but you will recognize its authenticity. The first video showed a human spacecraft approaching Kepler 442b, and the timestamp indicated it was from 37 years ago, and Kevin watched as the crew detected the alien research station and made first contact, and the initial exchanges were cautious but friendly, and both sides seemed genuinely interested in peaceful communication. Then the video jumped forward several weeks, and Kevin saw human military officers meeting in a secure conference room and discussing what to do about the alien presence. And one officer who he recognized as Admiral Patricia Blake argued passionately for establishing formal diplomatic relations, but she was overruled by others who expressed concern about alien technology falling into the hands of rival human nations. The decision was made to classify the entire incident and to maintain the fiction that Kepler 442b was uninhabited, and the crew of that first survey ship was sworn to secrecy and reassigned to different postings across the fleet. Kevin felt sick as he watched the video, and he said, "This is insane. And why would they hide something like this?" Fear and the alien woman said simply, and said, "Your species is still young and fractious, and your various nations and factions do not trust each other, and they believe that contact with advanced alien civilizations would destabilize the current balance of power, and so they maintain secrecy and hope to gain advantage through exclusive access to alien technology." She brought up more files showing dozens of similar incidents across multiple star systems, and each time the pattern was the same, and human explorers made contact with alien species, and the information was immediately classified and the witnesses were silenced. Kevin asked, "What about the other alien species, and do they know about this?" "Some do and some do not." And she said, "And my people have been aware of your government's deception for decades, and we have chosen to respect your desire for secrecy, even though we disagree with it, and we believe that your population deserves to know the truth. But we will not force that revelation upon you, and that is not our way." "Then why are you telling me now?" "Because the situation has changed." And she pulled up a new set of documents showing military requisition orders and weapon specifications, and said, 3 months ago, a hardline faction within your military command gained approval to deploy an experimental deep ocean kinetic impactor weapon to this system, and officially it is here for geological research. But its true purpose is to destroy our research station, and they believe they can make it look like a natural seismic event. Kevin studied the weapon specifications with growing horror, and the device was designed to strike with enough force to trigger massive underwater earthquakes and tsunamis, and it would indeed look like a natural disaster to anyone who did not know better. And he said, "When is it scheduled to deploy?" "In 69 hours, and she said, "And once it launches, there will be no way to stop it, and my people will die. And the faction responsible will have successfully eliminated what they see as an obstacle to human expansion, and they will likely attempt the same thing on other worlds where they have detected alien presence." Kevin felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him, and he asked, "What can we do to stop it?" "That depends on you, Kevin Harris," and she turned to look at him directly and said, "I can provide you with all the evidence you need to expose this conspiracy, and I can help you transmit it to civilian news networks and government oversight committees beyond the control of the military faction. But doing so will make you a traitor in the eyes of many, and your career will be destroyed, and you may face criminal charges, and you will be branded a liar and conspiracy theorist by those in power." He met her dark eyes and asked, "And if I do nothing, then my people die?" And she said flatly and said, "And the precedent is set that humanity will respond to alien contact with violence and extermination, and other species watching your development will take note and they will respond accordingly, and the war that follows may be won. Your species cannot win." The choice before him was clear, even if the consequences were terrifying. And Kevin took a deep breath and said, "Show me everything, and I need to see all the evidence so I know exactly what I am risking my life for." The alien woman inclined her head in what looked like respect and spent the next several hours walking him through decades of classified files, and each revelation was more disturbing than the last. And he learned about alien trading posts disguised as asteroid mining operations, and about diplomatic incidents that nearly sparked interstellar conflicts, and about human corporations that were secretly licensing alien technology and passing it off as their own innovations. He saw footage of alien cities on distant worlds, and of human diplomats negotiating resource rights, and of military strategists planning for conflicts against opponents whose capabilities they barely understood. By the time she finished, Kevin felt like he had aged 10 years, and everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in the galaxy had been turned upside down. She asked, "Are you still willing to help more than ever?" And he said with conviction and said, "This is wrong on every level, and people deserve to know the truth, even if it is frightening." She touched his shoulder with her four-fingered hand, and the gesture was surprisingly gentle, and she said, "You are braver than you know, Kevin Harris, and I hope that there are many more like you among your people. They spent the remainder of the journey planning their approach, and the alien woman whose name he learned was approximately pronounced as Zalethria, though her actual name existed in frequencies he could not hear, explained that she had contacts among human civilian journalists who had been investigating rumors of alien contact for years. When they reached the asteroid field, Zalethria's ship slipped between the tumbling rocks with impossible grace and settled into a hidden berth carved into the interior of a massive asteroid, and Kevin saw that the space had been modified with technology far beyond human capabilities, and there were docking clamps and atmosphere generators and even what looked like living quarters. Zalethria said, "This is one of several safe houses my people maintain throughout this region of space, and we have been preparing for the possibility that we might need to evacuate our research station. And I had hoped it would not come to this." They transferred the classified files onto a data storage device that would be compatible with human computer systems, and Kevin encrypted it using every protocol he knew, and Zalethria added her own layers of protection using technology that she assured him could not be cracked by any human cyber warfare division. Then came the hard part, and Kevin had to figure out how to get the information to journalists and oversight committees without being caught and traced before the story could break. Zalethria had a solution, and she produced a small communications device that could piggyback on commercial data networks without being detected, and Kevin recorded a video message explaining everything he had learned and laying out the evidence in clear terms. He looked into the camera and said, "My name is Lieutenant Commander Kevin Harris, and I am currently stationed aboard Research Station Kepler 7, and I am about to share information that will change everything you think you know about humanity's place in the universe, and what I am about to tell you is true, and I have the evidence to prove it, and I am risking everything to bring you this truth because the alternative is to be complicit in genocide." He detailed the history of human-alien contact and the decades of government cover-up and the imminent attack on Zalethria's people, and he provided coordinates and timestamps and names of officials involved, and he laid it all out with the precision of a military briefing. When he finished recording, Zalethria transmitted the message along with all the supporting evidence to every major news outlet and oversight committee and watchdog organization she could identify, and within minutes the information was spreading across human communication networks faster than any censorship attempt could contain it. They waited in the asteroid base, monitoring human news feeds, and Kevin watched as the story exploded across every channel, and initial skepticism quickly gave way to shock and outrage as independent analysts verified the authenticity of the classified documents. Government officials scrambled to respond, and the military faction responsible tried to deny everything and claim the documents were fabricated. But too many people had copies now, and too many experts were confirming the evidence was genuine. Within 24 hours, there were protests in the streets of every major human city, and people demanding answers and demanding accountability, and demanding that their government stop lying to them about alien contact. The admiral in charge of the deep ocean kinetic impactor weapon was relieved of command, and the device was immediately recalled before it could be deployed, and an emergency session of the United Earth Council was convened to address the crisis. Kevin watched it all unfold with a mixture of relief and anxiety, knowing that he had succeeded in preventing the attack, but also knowing that his life as he knew it was over. Zalethria stood beside him monitoring the feeds, and she said, "You have done something extraordinary, Kevin Harris, and you have potentially saved both our species from a war that would have benefited no one." He asked, "What happens now?" "Now we wait," and she said, "Your people will need time to process this revelation, and there will be anger and confusion and fear, but eventually I hope there will be dialogue and understanding and perhaps even true cooperation between our species." "What about me?" and Kevin asked, and said, "I am a deserter and a traitor by military law, and there will be people who want me executed. That is true." And Zalethria acknowledged and said, "But there will also be many who see you as a hero, and who recognize that you made an impossible choice, and chose the moral path. And as for the immediate future, you are welcome to remain here under my people's protection for as long as you need." They spent the next several days monitoring developments while Kevin tried to process everything that had happened, and the United Earth Council issued a formal apology to Zalethria's people and extended an invitation for official diplomatic contact. and several high-ranking officials resigned or were removed from office, and criminal investigations were launched into the cover-up. Eventually, a message came through for Kevin directly, and it was from a civilian oversight committee offering him immunity from prosecution in exchange for his testimony about the entire affair, and they assured him he would be protected as a whistleblower rather than prosecuted as a deserter. He looked at Zalathria and asked, "Do you think I can trust them? I think you have already changed the course of history." And she said, "Whether you trust them or not, the truth is out now, and it cannot be hidden again. And you have given your people the opportunity to choose a better path forward, and that is all anyone can ask." Kevin made arrangements to return to human space under the protection of the Oversight Committee, and before he left the asteroid base, Zalathria gave him a small crystal, similar to the one she had used to make him invisible to sensors. She said, "This is a communicator, and if you ever need to reach me, you need only hold it and think of me, and I will hear you." He took the crystal and said, "Thank you for trusting me and for giving me the chance to do the right thing. Thank you for being brave enough to listen." And she replied and said, "Most humans would have called security the moment I appeared in your quarters, and you chose differently, and that choice may have saved millions of lives on both sides." They parted with mutual respect, and Kevin returned to human space to face testimony and investigations and endless interviews. And he told his story over and over to anyone who would listen. And gradually public opinion shifted, and more people began to see him as someone who had made a terrible sacrifice for the greater good. The Deep Ocean Research Station on Kepler 442b was officially recognized and protected, and Zalathria's people began tentatively sharing some of their scientific knowledge with human researchers, and it was the beginning of a new era of cooperation and understanding. But there were still hardliners who saw Kevin as a traitor, and who believed that humanity should expand aggressively across the galaxy, regardless of who was already there, and he received death threats and had to live under constant security. And there were nights when he wondered if he had made the right choice. During those dark moments, he would hold the crystal communicator and think of Zalathria, and sometimes she would respond with words of encouragement or simply with a sense of presence that reminded him he was not alone. Years passed, and Kevin became a controversial figure in human society, and some saw him as a hero, and others as a villain. And the truth, as is often the case, was more complicated than either narrative. Formal diplomatic relations were established with multiple alien species, and humanity began to take its place in a galactic community that had existed for millions of years, and there were stumbling blocks and cultural misunderstandings and occasional conflicts. But there was also cooperation and trade, and the sharing of knowledge. Kevin eventually returned to Kepler 442b as part of the first official human diplomatic delegation to Zalathria's research station, and he descended through the ocean in a submersible craft to the deepest trench on the planet, where impossible structures of living crystal rose from the seafloor. Zalathria met him at the entrance to the station, and even after all the years that had passed, he still found her presence, both alien and comforting, and she gave him a tour of facilities that human scientists were only beginning to understand, and showed him research projects that had been running for centuries. They stood together in an observation dome looking out at the alien ocean, and she said, "Do you regret what you did, Kevin Harris, and do you wish you had made a different choice that night?" "I came to your quarters." He thought about everything he had lost in his career and his reputation and his simple, uncomplicated life, and then he thought about the 83 researchers who were still alive because of his choice, and about the war that had been averted, and about the new era of understanding between species. He said, "I regret nothing, and the cost was high, but it was worth paying, and I would make the same choice again without hesitation." She touched his shoulder with that same gentle gesture and said, "That is why I chose you. And I knew from studying your file that you were someone who would do what was right regardless of the cost. And I am grateful that I was not wrong." They spent the next several weeks working together on joint research projects, and Kevin learned that Zalathria's people studied the fundamental nature of consciousness and reality itself, and their work made human physics look like kindergarten finger painting. He asked, "Why do you study things like this, and what do you hope to learn?" "We hope to understand the nature of existence itself." And Zalathria said, "We believe that consciousness is not a product of matter, but rather the reverse, and that matter is a product of consciousness. And if we can understand how that works, then we can understand everything. It was a humbling perspective, and Kevin realized that humanity still had so much to learn and so far to go. When it came time for him to return to Earth, Zelethria gave him one final gift, and it was a small amount of a crystalline substance that her people used to enhance cognitive function, and, she said, "This will help you think more clearly and see connections that you might otherwise miss, and use it wisely." He returned to human space and continued his work as an advocate for transparency and cooperation with alien species. And he wrote extensively about his experiences, and gradually his reputation shifted from controversial to respected. But he never forgot that night when an alien woman appeared in his quarters without warning and changed his life forever, and sometimes late. At night he would still hold the crystal communicator and reach out across the light years to check in with Zelethria. She always answered. Decades passed and Kevin grew old, while Zelethria remained essentially unchanged, and her species aged much, more slowly than humans, and they stayed in contact throughout. And she became his closest friend despite the vast differences between them. When Kevin was finally on his deathbed, surrounded by family and friends, he used the crystal communicator one last time, and Zelethria appeared not in person but as a holographic projection. She said, "Goodbye, old friend. And thank you for everything you did, and you changed the course of history, and you proved that humans are capable of rising above their worst instincts and choosing compassion over fear." He smiled weakly and said, "I just did what anyone should have done." "No," and she said firmly and said, "What you did was extraordinary, and it required courage that few possess, and I am honored to have known you, Kevin Harris." He closed his eyes and asked one final question, and he said, "Was it all worth it in the end? And did we make the right choices?" She was quiet for a long moment and then said, "I believe we did. And your species still has much to learn, and there are still those who fear and hate what is different. But there are also many who choose understanding and cooperation, and the balance has shifted because of what you did, and that is worth everything." Kevin Harris died peacefully that night, knowing that he had made a difference and that the universe was a slightly better place because of the choice he made when an alien woman came into his quarters without warning. And somewhere in the deep ocean of a distant world, Zelethria continued her research and remembered the human who had been brave enough to listen and to act and to sacrifice everything for what was right. The end.